What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another segment of HR Heretics. Today we bring on friend of the pod, Melanie Naranjo. Mel, what's up? It's good to see you.
Hi, all.
Good to see you, Mel.
Thank you very much. If you just heard some noise in the background, that was my cats running around because, as Nolan has discovered today, I am a cat lady and I have no shame. I have no shame. Single cat lady, single childless cat lady, and not upset about it.
Ooh, and asterisk, and a dog lady, which the cat and the dogs get along, which is incredible, and I think says something about the owner.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's important to like both, okay? Cats and dogs. We don't have to pick and choose.
We will definitely cover that in another segment. Today, we're actually going to talk about a tough one, which is employee litigation. So let me set the scene. I continue to hear from friends, either execs or chief people officers, that there is an increasing trend in employee litigation. So what seems to be happening is more employees are filing suit against companies. I think there's a couple of things going on here, but Mel, let me turn it over to you. Is this something that you're hearing, that you're seeing amongst your community?
A ton. I hear it all the time. As you all know, I run this monthly webinar and we just see in the comments people really lamenting about this challenge. I had to performance manage someone and immediately they claimed discrimination, or I had to give someone tough feedback and they claimed retaliation. It's a very common thing. I think, as you know, I think it's very nuanced. I think there are a lot of things behind this, but I do think it's very scary. And I think we need to acknowledge for the HR world, it's also just very frustrating and stressful because whether it's intentional misuse of these terms or inadvertent misuse of these terms, what ends up happening is a bunch of time, energy, resources, and money has to get spent to chase after these things as HR professionals scramble to bring in lawyers to support them on, these very serious cases because people are using scary words. Now, my perspective is I think we do have some people who are maybe coming in and intentionally abusing these words. But I think we also have a lot of people who have been misinformed. I think that there's a lot of information, a lot of misinformation on the internet, on TikTok, coming from your friends, where people are being, really pushed. I would go so far as to say pressured to make sure you stand up for yourself, make sure you never let anyone pull one over on you. And I think it comes from this really good place. But I think that sometimes people get misled and they end up escalating situations and turning things into something that they're not, right? Difficult feedback is not discrimination in and of itself, right? And so I think that's the conversation we need to be having. Why is this happening? How do we manage these conversations? How do we try to get ahead of them before they happen? How do we de-escalate when they happen? And when we're in full out, lawsuit situation, what do we do?
So Kelly, I've probably seen 8 of these. I have personally been deposed twice and on the stand once in one of these cases. How much experience do you have with this, Kelly?
I have a lot. I mean, I haven't been in court, obviously. Not obviously, just I haven't been in court. We always kind of got to an agreement. I have been in mediation before, but I've usually always kind of cut these things off at the pass and got them resolved before that, which I think is a topic in itself. Because I think, the patience level and the tolerance level of various leadership teams or founders, CHROs, how you treat these things can, cause escalation or cut it off. And I think the tolerance level has an aspect on that, meaning go tell them to pound sand. We did the right thing. We're not giving in. I think sometimes that can lead to going further down the litigation line than giving in, if that makes sense.
So it does, and I think that's actually the traditional advice, and so that's the advice what I got earlier in my career, and then I think this trend has really accelerated over the last, call it like 5 to 6 years, and I think some of the veracity of these claims, to Melanie's point, is coming from this perspective of I need to advocate for myself because it just doesn't feel fair, and so I think there's basically 3 paths a company can take when presented with an employee threatening litigation. One is you try and mediate and figure out like what's going on and try and just like, not have the lawyers get involved. I think that is the ideal path. If that doesn't work, I think it comes to a fork in the road. And the traditional advice is just like, just settle. Like, you don't want to get lawyers involved. It's a pain in the ass. It's super expensive. Like, just make this go away and keep operating. And then the contrarian advice is fight it. And the reason you want to fight it is because you want to set an example that you are not going to be held hostage from any employees making illegitimate claims. And I have played out all three of those paths. Obviously, path one is what you want to try and do first, but I am increasingly seeing like more people willing to take it all the way to like, let's get the lawyers involved. And I would say 10 years ago, the settlement advice almost everybody was taking. And increasingly now I'm seeing companies saying like, no, like we are not going to be held hostage. We don't believe we did anything wrong. And so like we will go to the mats and fight this. And so I'm curious, Mel, what are you seeing? Are you seeing the same trends?
Well, okay, I'm gonna circle back to this because I first have a question, which is when I hear that, I feel like what's happening is you are targeting a surface level issue. The surface level issue is that someone's suing you and you want to take a stand. I think the deeper issue is you maybe weren't transparent enough. And so employees filled in the gaps with their own assumptions. You didn't train your managers on how to have empathetic conversations. So people felt pissed off and they were like, I'm going to take it out on you. Or, maybe there genuinely was a lack of clarity and expectation setting in the recruitment process. You brought in employees who thought you were one type of company. You were not one type of company. And it ended up leading to all these issues and misunderstandings and upset. So I think when you say this idea that like, oh, maybe more companies are moving in this direction and that's, you're taking a stand so that you show that we're not going to take this. I don't know that addresses the underlying issue, which is that there's probably a lot of discontent among your employees, and just showing them that you're the head honcho and you won't be, forced into a decision. I don't know that solves the problem.
I agree. I think the way you describe that, Nolan, is accurate in the sense of, when I started in this profession 20 years ago at the bigger companies, it was very, hey, settle this, that, I get it. And now earlier stage, kind of more edgy companies that are going from first principles, like, this is not right. We're going to fight this. However, I think that's a very, to Mel's point, surface level and almost too simple of a model. Like this is a very messy thing with a lot of combinations and a lot of context. Sometimes people get the combinations right and a lot of times they get it wrong. And the combination I'm talking about, just to keep it simple in my mind, is a 2x2, square, 2x2 situation. The left axis, you have treated well, treated poorly. And then in the other one, you have fair and unfair. When the performance issues and the feedback is fair and you're treated well, usually those things end cordially. But that's the goal, is for things to end cordially. When I see treated poorly, perceived to be treated poorly, no matter if the feedback is fair or unfair, this is where this stuff kind of blows up. That's what I've seen. And then there are outliers, because I had one recently, and I won't, obviously go into stuff, but in the past 3 years, I had a very fair issue, treated not just well, but like exceptionally well. And they decided to, it was just like, what? So my point is that it's all over the map, and sometimes they're outliers and sometimes they're not. But in my experience, no matter if it's fair or unfair, if someone's perceived to be treated poorly, lack of transparency or respect or whatever it is, that's where people get angry and they want to get revenge, right? They seek revenge. They want to gut punch the company. They want to get a lawyer and expect a bunch of money or whatever it is.
I hear you. The reality, though, is all of that is subjective.
I didn't say it wasn't.
Totally. But I'm just describing to you that, like, I think when we get actually into this and we get into how many of these cases that go all the way to court, who's winning? Are employees winning or companies winning? And I think what you'll find, I don't actually know this data, it'd be interesting to see this data, But I think what you'll find is that for the most part, companies are winning. And the reason why is because employment is at will. And to Melanie's point to start the show, there's this woman, you guys have probably seen this on Instagram and TikTok, who does these things about like when your flight is delayed, like, you know, don't just like accept like the delayed flight thing, like go get like $1,000. And I think there's this perception that applies into employment. And for the most part in the United States, it does not. Employment is at will. And so even though companies may be treating employees not well or potentially like, you know, they feel like unfairly, ultimately in the court of law, that doesn't matter. And so I'm not saying like you should do those things, but I am saying those things certainly happen inside of companies for a whole variety of reasons that honestly, this is the case for HR. Right? Fixing those things will save you so much time and money. And this is where a great people team can just lay the tracks and make things so much easier for you if you're running a business. But that said, sometimes they still happen even with a great people team, because if you have a large organization, you just can't control all of the things that are going on inside of that organization. And as somebody who is initially on the side of like, let's just make these things go away, I have since been on the side of, well, I actually think we need to go to the mats on a couple of these things and set an example, because it's happening too frequently. And people are thinking that they can honestly extort the company for additional money when the reality is employment is at will.
Yeah. I like what you said about the strong foundations, because that does, it helps control a lot of the variables that can get out of control and subjective. It really can.
I have learned people are litigious. Now, it's not like everybody is, but many people actually are litigious. I had one of the craziest situations ever with a new hire who literally on day one forced our recruiting coordinator to like sign a paper. And he was like, I don't know what I'm signing here. And it turned out to be like she was filing a claim with him as a witness that something happened at her gym. He wasn't there. He felt pressured to sign it. He signed it. We were like, what the hell is going on here? She had performance things. We decided to terminate. She then filed suit against us. And so that was one that we were like, we're taking this one to the mats. Like, we don't feel like we've done anything wrong here. There's been other cases to where, you know, folks have come after us because they felt like they were induced, or other things happened during the recruiting process. And, you know, ultimately, like, I just think there is a subset of people that are litigious. And I think that subset of people is growing.
I'm going to make a comment that nobody is going to want to hear, okay? But listen, it's what I'm thinking. I want to acknowledge, like, on the HR side, let's just be real. Like, this is stressful. This is frustrating. In fact, quite frankly, you yourself can feel burned, and you did everything in your power to give this person a fair and equitable treatment. And then it's like a slap in the face. I want to acknowledge that. To be honest, sometimes it makes you start to get cynical and you just don't want to try as hard because I give up, right? Nothing I can do is ever going to be enough, right? And also, I want to look at the other side of this, because I have increasingly over the past few years become really empathetic to the idea that I think because so many people are getting misinformation, when someone genuinely believes that they have been wronged, they genuinely feel horrible. This is actually emotionally devastating for them. And listen, I think you were right, Nolan. I think there are a few people who, unfortunately, they maybe don't have the best of intentions, and, you know, they're in a separate bucket. But I have actually seen, especially with people who are newer to the workforce, so if we want to call them the bucket of Gen Z, we can. But I have seen more and more people where they come and they bring a case and they claim, this is discrimination, I've been discriminated against. And it's quite clear to me that they haven't. Of course, we're going to do all the right steps to investigate and make sure, is there something we missed, whatever. But you realize that no discrimination has taken place. But they, in their hearts, genuinely believe they have been discriminated against. And this is miserable for them. And so I think there's something to be said about the importance of thinking about both perspectives, right? Like, at the end of the day, I don't think anybody wants to go, except for, you know, those rare cases, right? I don't think anybody wants to have this long, sometimes years long, dragged out process that they have to go through. But people who genuinely feel wronged will do it. And I think it's worth exploring, Jesus, like, what did we do to push them to that point? And how can we help correct some of the misinformation? How do we educate our employees? Because I think sometimes the inclination is to never talk about these things. I don't want to talk about discrimination. I don't want to talk, nobody use that word. Manager, if somebody even hints at the fact that they're neurodivergent, you end that discussion immediately. I don't want to hear it, right? What if we just leaned into the discussion, right? What if we said, oh, you think that you are neurodivergent? You think you have ADD? You think you have a back problem? Okay, cool. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. I really appreciate you trusting me with that information. I want to make sure you get support that you need. I, unfortunately, am not equipped to help you with that. So I'd love to make sure that you get connected with the right person. Maybe that's HR, maybe that's someone else. But the point is, I think sometimes we're a little too scared of these conversations and we're leaning away from them when I think actually we should be leaning into them.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Real talk, most talent leaders haven't yet cracked how to leverage AI for meaningful impact on their hiring processes and business goals. But the leaders who are effectively using AI to transform their recruiting team's efficiency and quality use Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. That means your people can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate in every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Join forward-thinking talent leaders at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaView.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts, or get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI-enabled in minutes.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I will say, in areas where the company is wrong, you should absolutely settle. Like you should 1000% settle, because like people make mistakes, things happen, you learn from those mistakes, you get better, you move on, and just like make them go away. Mel, my issue with what you're describing though is companies have to take on so much now. And I don't want to be the person that's like representing companies, but like the reality is now, we have to train these people because college teaches you nothing. Then they get into the organization and all this shit is going around in the world. And now we have to be the place where they come every day. And now we have to like be worried about all of their emotions and all of the things going on in their personal lives when like we're trying to run a business here. And it just feels like the burden on companies is growing tremendously when the personal burden feels like it's kind of shrinking. And it's just so much easier to be like, well, I don't feel like I was treated fairly. And so now I'm going to get my lawyer involved. And, I have really evolved on this topic because it went from a fringe issue to, I think, a lot more mainstream. And I've gotten to the point where like, I've actually thought about this, and I don't know if there is a tool available to this, but I think it would be an interesting tool to look at, which is, find all of this is public information once lawsuits are filed. I would actually be really curious to put everybody that we're recruiting through that filter to be like, who has filed employment litigation in the past? Because I don't think that's part of anybody's recruiting process now. And I think if we fast forward in 10 years, I think that will be absolutely part of the recruiting process. It's happening all the time.
That's interesting.
Well, the problem there, though, is that, in my opinion, in my experience and understanding, most claims of discrimination, retaliation, harassment, whatever you want to call it, they don't make it all the way to court, right? They settle. So I don't know how you'd get like a truly accurate.
Because somebody has to file. It's when somebody files, the filing is public record.
And then they'll ask, well, why do you want that information? Did you not hire me because of this? And there's a whole other can of worms to work through, which is a potential issue.
I think I'm not saying it's like the right thing to do. I'm saying I have absolutely thought about it in the last 4 to 5 years because of how frequently it has happened. Like it's stunning how often it's coming up.
Here's what I think. Funnily enough, I actually do not disagree with you, Nolan, on the perspective that at the end of the day, this is a place of work, right? And I'm actually not a big believer in, we need to coddle our employees. We need to be everything for our employees. We need to help them in their personal life. I'm actually not a believer in that. I really believe like this is the workplace. You come here to get work done, and we're trying to achieve something together as a team for the business. But I think the solution isn't to try and find out like who maybe has filed a claim and this and that, because you never know, maybe it was a legitimate claim, right? I think the solution is to set really clear expectations in the recruitment process about what kind of company you are and you aren't. And I'll give a very real example. Ethena is a compliance company, right? When I joined, and this is still true, our mission and values, our mission statement is to build inclusive and ethical workplaces. So you can imagine we attract a certain kind of employee who wants to work here. One of the things that we realized was happening is, I think, quite common across employees is they will fill in the gaps with the unspoken things. And so many of our candidates were filling in the gaps. And when they read inclusive and ethical workplace, they read fun, they read family. And the reality is we are not a family environment. We are a very hardworking team. We are incredibly talent dense. The performance bar is so high. Like I truly cannot emphasize that enough. And we realized that because we weren't saying that, people were reading inclusive and they thought that meant we're just a family. And that's just not the case. And so we ended up having to go back in our recruitment process. And I kid you not, our recruitment process is so direct now, where we tell people this is not a family environment. This is not a place where you come to have fun. This is a place where you come to be competitive, to be passionate, to kick ass. And if that's not fun for you, if that's intimidating, this is not the place for you. Wish you all the best. That's amazing. Go find that company for you, but this is not it. And so we set that tone and expectation from the beginning. And so I would imagine that companies who are running into issues with claims, so on and so forth, I would want to root into the underlying issue and then make sure at the recruitment process, you are being very clear with your candidates so that they can self-select out of that process.
Yeah. And then, orthogonal to that and to your comment, Nolan, about companies having to do all these things and training folks. It is on the people team back to being consistent and having a foundation to be clear when you're building these programs, when you're talking to the organization, which we should be, about how we manage, right, the experience here, what these things mean and how they're dealt with, right? What does hostile work environment mean? Just know that if you come to us and you say these things, it's not like tossing around some venting conversation, because I got to be honest, in my career, 60% of the time, they're just saying it. And I'm like, do you know we just crossed a red light, green light? Says, no, I didn't mean that. So I do think you can level set to some extent in the recruitment process, but also in your architecting, your people team and your setting expectations with your employees on how things are done here, and then being consistent about that. Because I don't know about you both, but what's been happening a lot is like anything, employees are talking to each other. Hey, I just literally got this ambulance chaser lawyer. I got 9 months severance. Oh, well, I want 9 months severance. And then you have the CFO complain. Well, now there's precedent and we can't do it. It's like, oh, well, yeah, these two things were BS, but this one's actually real. So it gets very messy very quickly. And that's very hard to defend against. The best way I've seen it is to try and get in front of the 8 ball, to set expectations and educate your company on what these things are so they don't run around with scissors.
That is really well said, Kelli. And it's like a giant ad for a company that Melanie works at. The other thing I'll say is, I am usually brutal on lawyers and have historically not had great relationships with lawyers, and they've heard my wrath on this show. Employment lawyers are the exception. I have had some of the smartest people I've ever worked with. And it turns out, I think these people are in very, very high demand because of how often this is happening. And so I think a combination of what both of you said, Melanie, which is setting these expectations up front, being incredibly clear with employees what it is actually like to work at that company. I think, Kelli, we've probably said that a million times on this show. I hope people understand this is why you do it. And then, Kelli, to your point on, I used to hate these trainings. I used to always say I wish our doc for all employees that they have to sign just says be an adult. That's the line. One line is be an adult. But it turns out, people have so much ambiguity. And Melanie, to your earlier point of just creating these narratives when gaps in the story exist, you do actually have to be more clear. You have to train people on what it means. And then I think finally, if you enter one of these situations, there's nothing more expensive than a bad lawyer. And so having really good employment counsel, outside counsel, I have found to be like one of the most important levers in dealing with these situations.
I will add one very quick note, because what I don't want people to walk away from this discussion thinking is, man, if we could just get employees to keep their mouths shut, not talk to each other, just let us do our jobs, right? I don't think that's what any of us are saying. For the record, like I'm going to be super clear here. I think it's actually a great thing that employees are talking to each other. I think it's a great thing that employees are becoming more aware of their legal rights and protections. I think there are too many cases of people who didn't speak up, who were genuinely mistreated, discriminated against, retaliated against, and got no justice because they were too scared, they didn't understand their rights. So I want to put that out there. I don't think the problem is employees are talking to each other or employees are speaking too much. And I don't think that or advocating for themselves too much. And I don't think the solution is try and quell all discussions. I think the solution is accept that employees are going to talk. Accept that employees are hearing these words everywhere. And so what are you doing to try and help control the narrative and make sure that they are not filling in the gaps with misinformation, right? What are you doing to make sure understanding that this is non-negotiable? This is the way of the world now, okay? We're global. We've got TikTok. We got all the things. What are you doing to try and make sure that the information that they do get is actually useful and not going to be detrimental both to themselves and to the company?
Yeah. And that your processes are sound and consistent and quality so that you can figure out when someone's been wronged and do the right thing versus maybe not. And separating, the signal from the noise is hard sometimes, but really necessary, because some people are genuinely treated very unfairly and illegally, to your point.
Yeah, I mean, Kelli, I think you've heard me say this in the past, but when I was 8 years old, I got chicken pox. My mom had to stay home with me, and she was terminated the next day. And so like that's what happened, in the 90s. It does still happen. I think we can all agree at a decreasing rate, which is the right thing. I'll leave our audience with this, which is, what is it? The Bambi golden rule. It's just treat others the way that you want to be treated. And if you're in one of these situations too, I'll say this as well. It is scary. It is absolutely scary to be threatened when you think you haven't done anything wrong, because you're not only thinking about what the punishment could be for the company or what the company's going to go through it, you're also thinking about your own personal reputation and how your personal reputation, can be on the line in these situations. And so the last plug I'll make is this is why community is important. This is why you need to have other execs and chief people officers that are your homies that you can reach out to on a confidential basis and get their advice, because it turns out I think a lot more people have been through this than you actually realize. So Mel, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Mel.
Thanks for the hot topic idea.
Fun as always.
Always here for the spice.
Let us know what you guys think in the comments. HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment is Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.